reason we record is to make sure anybody who can't make a session can catch up by watching the recording. And if there's something particularly interesting you want to go back and see again, they can jump back in there. But let's get going. We'll give a bit of info about the course and how to interact and all of that sort of stuff. But welcome to the cycling infrastructure course. We'll introduce ourselves shortly. But let's jump onto the first slide there, Max.
No problem.
Oh.
Did you have a different first slide?
No, that's,
okay.
That's me. It was just no, all good. So my name's Ken Beer. For those I don't know, I'm going to be the program moderator for this course. So I'll be in the background answering questions and organising things. The best way to interact for this course is to use the chat function, which you can see there. Now, the reason we have that as the primary source of communicating is so we're not bogged down with the dogs barking in the background or the shouting or people forgetting to unmute and mute and those sorts of challenges. So pop that in there. You'll see there's a little arrow there that you can talk to either the program host and moderator, which is Max and I, or you can drop down to everybody. And we do like the chat to go to everybody. So really suggest you use that drop down and put your questions out there to Max and myself, but let everybody see that because they might have the same question and that'll do that, or make some comments as things come up and get a bit of chat going. And I'll be basically working the chat behind the scenes as Max goes through the content. Now, if for some reason your chat function is not working, there's the Q&A. All right, chat is the primary one, but some firewalls occasionally block that, and the Q&A is available. So if you can't make a session or you're having technical challenges or the like, get in contact with me. My contact details are there. And we do have a few backups. So you hopefully got a pack in the mail with a PDF, a memory stick with the slides on it. If you haven't got that yet, don't worry. It's not critical to the course. It's just sort of your backup and a few little goodies to help you along your journey. There's also Moodle, which we'll talk you through shortly, which contains all the info. But we found that if things go bad, usually logging out of Zoom and logging back in fixes most issues. So hopefully everything's working out there. Right, let's keep ticking along there, Max. And I'll let you introduce yourself.
No worries. Welcome, everyone. Max McCardle here, Senior Project Engineer at Safe Systems Solutions and heavily involved within the cycling space here. And have been for a lot of my career. I also used to work at Vic Roads and was involved in the $100 million Safer Pedestrian and Cyclist Fund many years ago, which was all about prioritising different cycling projects and determining which projects warranted funding. So having a very high-level overview of different projects across the state and trying to work out the best value for money, but also been involved in several detailed designs and just ensuring that we're applying best practice cycling infrastructure, which is what we're going to get into throughout this course. And we're going to be looking at lots of examples all across the jurisdictions, as well as some international examples as well. So you get a taste for all the different types of cycling infrastructure that's out there. And Ken, did you want to introduce yourself? Sure, we all know Ken.
Yes, well, there I am without my COVID moustache edition, not the Movember edition, but yeah, I'm Principal Engineer at Safe System Solutions, do a lot of road safety auditing, safe system assessing, and a lot of cycling auditing out on the bike. And like Max, we work on a lot of the cycling infrastructure projects together. And yeah, we're really excited to take the idea of cycling auditor courses where we ride you around the city and look at lots of different bits and pieces and stop along the way and have coffee and then presenters and the like, and try to put it into an online format with COVID and everything like that. We're pretty excited at where we've got to. So Max will take you through lots of this stuff, but we have lots of interactive bits and pieces and videos and things for you to get involved with a little bit later on as we go. Back to you, Max. Or is it to me? Oh, it's me.
Fantastic. Yeah, you can run through Moodle if you want, Ken.
Well, I will run through Moodle in a lot more detail at the end if hopefully we get time, and just show people live how to use Moodle. But for everybody, you should have got a login to Moodle and got yourself in there, because Moodle is our learning management system. It is where you're going to do all the quizzes, the assignments, upload those, and where you'll find copies of lots of the resources and things like that. So if you haven't accessed Moodle yet, make sure you get in contact with either myself or Kathy, or Emma, who have emailed you information. Have a look in your junk folder if you haven't got the email yet, but you will need to get into there. So let me know. Back to you, Max.
Thank you, Ken. So you'll see this fellow dotted around this presentation and over the next few modules as well. This is our good friend Wally the Wombat, and the reason that we've included him is because we want to make sure that everyone is engaged in all the slides, and you're not just popping this in the background and working on your roundabout design or your whatever reports that you need to do. We do want to make sure that everyone's committed to this hour and a half that we've dedicated for each of these sessions. So what we've done is we've included this fellow on a few different slides, and we ask you to tally up how many you actually see in today's presentation. That will be included as a quiz question. So one of the quiz questions will be, how many Wally the Wombats did you see? And we do give you a little bit of tolerance just in case we push through the slides too quickly, but do feel free to grab a scrap bit of paper and just take note of how many you see throughout the day, and it will be marked later on. And just a big disclaimer here, this one is not included in the count. So your current Wally the Wombat count is 0. So everyone is currently on 0. A few other just admin and logistical things. We do have competency requirements for this course. So we do need everyone to attend all the webinars, and if you are unable to make a particular module, we do record everything. So once everything's recorded, we upload that onto Moodle. And as long as you've watched a recorded webinar, that does still count towards that competency. You need to get satisfactory completion of all set tasks, which is actually a minimum of 80%. So we're not shy to say that we do set quite a high target there. We do want to see, practitioners out there that have really understand what's being taught within these modules and understand how to apply that. So it is a relatively high pass mark. However, we do allow up to 3 attempts, as well as one-on-one coaching if you require that. So if you aren't perhaps passing the quizzes and not meeting that benchmark, feel free to get in touch and we can arrange a phone call or a Zoom meeting just to make sure that we have adequately shared our knowledge properly, because if we are not seeing a passing cohort, then we have failed as educators. So we do want to make sure that everything that we're saying kind of makes sense and it's working well at your end as well. I'm going to hop straight into the session agenda now, but before I get stuck into the rest of
Okay.
acknowledge the traditional custodians of the varied lands that we gather on today, elders past, present and emerging, and they are varied lands that we're gathered on today. We've got people up in Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania and across the ditch in New Zealand as well. So welcome everyone. It's lovely to see so many different jurisdictions here today, and some of the slides that you'll come across, perhaps you haven't seen that jurisdictional guidance before. It'd be interesting if you want to share your own resources within that space. There's lots of awesome papers out there, and we've kind of copied and pasted particular guidance from different jurisdictions. We haven't focused on one particular area, but if you think your jurisdiction does something slightly better or just a slight tweaks on things, very interested if you could share that. So yeah, just keep that in mind. Ken, any questions?
I know I had a little glitch in the video there, Max. I think it was as I think the wonderful bike was coming in, but then everything went super fast to catch up. So I was jumping in because I thought we'd lost you, and I was getting excited because I got to take over running the content of the course. But No, back to you there, Max. But please, everybody, don't wait for Max to ask for questions. Put your questions in as you think of them, as you see them, and we'll have that chat going on behind the scenes. But lots to cover today, Max. Jump into it.
Thank you very much. Yes, and you certainly are in good hands if we do have any technical difficulties, because Ken will be very competent at covering all this course content. However, let's have a look at what we'll discuss today. So it's all going to be about off-road cycling facilities or shared paths. And if you're looking at your strategic cycling corridors, or you're looking at providing cycling infrastructure that is, meant to be your top class or your tier one, this is what you're looking at. All cyclists, ages from 8 to 80, they feel most comfortable generally on off-road facilities. They don't want to be sharing, with general traffic. They don't want to be on-road, even if it is separated. If you can provide an off-road facility, that's generally considered your best practice here. And although that sounds quite simplistic, there are degrees to how effective that shared path is for the cycling community. So what we're going to be discussing today is providing best practice shared path or off-road cycling facilities, and we'll be looking at some particular design considerations, including the widths, the gradients, hazards, how to actually protect errant cyclists from colliding with hazards and making them as obvious as possible. Discuss things like sight lines and fencing is a very big one. We'll also look at how shared paths cross roads. Unfortunately, it's very rare to see just a, kilometre after kilometre of just nothing but cycling path. There are interactions with the road. So it's all about how to manage that conflict and what we can do within that space. And we will discuss bollards, which is certainly a sore spot for cyclists sometimes. So something worth considering as part of any design. And this last topic here isn't quite covered all that commonly, but actually providing some kind of signage on our shared paths. We'll get into that topic as well. So there's plenty to discuss today, and I will be going through this at a reasonable pace, but please do chuck in any comments that you have, and Ken will answer those as he sees fit, or he'll pass them up to me and we can discuss it live. So plenty to get through today, guys. Okay, so shared path design. This first image that I've included here is actually a separated facility where you've got cyclists within this space here and pedestrians use closer to the foreshore here. This is like an esplanade area. So you've got the two different vulnerable road users have two separate spaces. So it's not quite a shared path. This is actually where you've got separate facilities, which I think is a big win for cyclists, because this is a very, very common commuter route up and down here, which means cyclists are at speed. And I'm sure as everyone who's ever walked as a pedestrian or used a shared path, when you have cyclists at speed and they're weaving in and out of pedestrians, it doesn't feel particularly safe, and it doesn't feel particularly agreeable to be there. In terms of the environment is not quite meant for that type of movement. So in this instance, what we do have is the separated road users within this space, and I'll just get rid of some of these arrows so we can see it a bit clearer, which improves the safety for both cyclists and pedestrians. Now, I would be a little bit naive to suggest that just because this is a cycle lane, that only cyclists use it. Of course, you do get pedestrians that stop and pause and take photos of the beautiful esplanade, and they're within the bicycle lane. However, I think that the general principle behind this is, rather than let everyone share this narrow 3-meter space, let's try and separate these users where we can and provide as much space as possible. Fully appreciate not every project would have this real estate available here, but just wanted to illustrate this particular example. Okay, so we'll get stuck into path widths, and you'll see right down the bottom here, we've got a 3-meter path width, which is a fairly standard measurement used throughout the network. And the actual metrics along these axes, we've got the number of cyclists two-way per peak hour and the number of peds two-way per peak hour. So the main takeaway that I'd like everyone to get from this graph is basically, as you're increasing the number of cyclists and peds, so as both of these numbers are getting higher and you're getting higher up this chart, what you are looking at is you want to be providing separate facilities for both pedestrians and cyclists. In other words, that image that I showed previously, that was a very good instance where you've got both high pedestrian traffic, predominantly tourists, meandering along the esplanade, and high cycling traffic. So rather than try and build one wide facility where both can kind of coexist, there's two separate facilities. So it's something to keep in mind with your projects. If you do have these high numbers, then that would be certainly worthwhile considering. And apologies, my dog has just heard the mailman, so sorry if you can hear him bark in the background. I'll hop on to another slide that also discusses our path width. And this is one that I wouldn't necessarily describe as best practice because it's from Austroads Guides, but this local access path and suggesting that a minimum of 2 meters can be facilitated. I think that this image particularly shows just how narrow 2 meters is. So that's two pedestrians walking side by side. And you can see there's really not space there for a cyclist to travel either, into the photo or out. There's not the room available there. So I wouldn't suggest that you opt for the minimums that are given within these tables. Instead, take them as the worst case scenario. For our best practice cycling infrastructure, we do need to be looking at how we get to these maximum widths, which is certainly more desirable, both for pedestrians and for cyclists. And if you've got any wheelchair users within that space, providing those narrow areas just does not create a comfortable experience for anyone that uses there. And once again, fully appreciate that there are site constraints, but just something to acknowledge that although these figures are given as minimums, they don't really reflect best practice. So just something to consider. There are definitions within the Austroads Guides as to what local access and what a regional and what a recreational path means. It's all got to do with that type of facility and the expected number of users within that area. However, because there's some kind of loose interpretation as to how you would apply that, you can kind of make a decision as a project team what the best description of your environment would be. Rule of thumb though, if you can make it a wider environment for cyclists, it's certainly going to improve the level of safety and also just the comfortableness of actually riding that facility. So that's all about path widths. We'll also hop into our gradients. I mentioned this in my little introduction on Moodle, saying that I don't do uphill gradients. I actively avoid uphill. I'm a pretty confident cyclist. I ride on the road and fairly happy merging in front of traffic if I need to, but I don't like riding uphill. I just find it exhausting, and there's other things I'd rather be doing. So, but for other people like Ken, our lycra-clad mammals, they're not as put off as me. But just wanted to bring attention to this particular figure. This is straight out of Austroads as well. And this is just a means of actually quantifying what would be considered, appropriate or acceptable for particular gradients and what would be considered desirable for cyclists. So along our horizontal axis, we've got the gradient here, and the vertical is the length of the gradient. The main takeaway here is basically stating as your gradient gets more significant, so as it starts to get steeper and steeper and steeper, you want to get really, really small sections of that. So you don't want to have, a 10% gradient that goes on for hundreds of meters, because it's not going to be an attractive facility for cyclists. They may not even use it. So this is something to consider. I suppose it's obviously very dependent on the existing road contours, or sorry, the existing contours of the lands and things like that. But there are opportunities to ensure that you're providing, a flat or reasonably flat surface for cyclists. And this is a really useful graph to refer to ensure that you're not going to be impeding on the attractiveness or the comfortability for cyclists to use that facility. Another interesting point about the gradient is often we tend to focus on that uphill gradient, but it can be a safety concern for downhill as well. So this is an example of, I've got an overpass structure here where cyclists can ride along and then head on down like so. And right at the bottom here, you can kind of see it, but there's another shared path that connects right at the base of the ramp here. I'll show you on the other image, it's slightly there. Sorry for my terrible arrows. I'm trying this new stylus, so I'm still getting used to it. I'll get rid of that one. And the issue with this particular gradient decision is, understandably, it's difficult to change the height of your structure that goes across the road. You need to meet minimum clearances. And it's also difficult to how far you're going to ramp out to make sure that you're not taking up, too much space, and the actual structure that brings it back down to ground level isn't, kilometers long. So these have certainly adopted reasonably fair gradients. But the issue in terms of safety at this particular site is because you've got this connecting shared path that meets here, it's incredibly difficult if you were cycling down at speed to be able to spot any cyclists that would be coming in at this minor leg. And so the issue there is you could be just traveling, if you didn't use your brakes at all, from the start of that at stationary at the top of the ramp all the way down to the bottom, if you were just using physics, you'd be going 30, 40 kilometers per hour easily. And if someone was to happen to pop up into that shared path right in front of you, very difficult to be able to stop or swerve or get out of the way. So you basically created this conflict point that is going to be very difficult for cyclists to be able to see other cyclists, and also just at the speeds of this that this gradient creates, it just augments that risk. So another option would be to move the shared path connection further down this alignment here. So you've got much better sight distances. You can see where cyclists or pedestrians are entering, and you just kind of mitigated that risk in particular. So this was a road safety audit that we actually completed on this particular project, and that was the recommendation that we made. And luckily, it was accepted by the project team, and that's actually already been installed. I don't have a photo of it, but yes. Another reason why gradients are something to consider as part of your shared path design. When we look at hazards for cyclists, we need to consider our cyclist envelope. So pedestrians have an envelope, wheelchair users have an envelope, heavy vehicles have an envelope, cyclists have one as well. So you've got to refer to those guys. There's a few different guidance papers out there which have slightly different values. This one's taken from the New South Wales guide, which I think is probably the best one. What's always common is a metre width, operating width of the bicycle and rider, and the head clearance, 200 mil or 0.2 meters. Some other papers say that's 500, but this is obviously a little bit more conservative than saying 0.2 meters. So the reason that's so important, it's particularly relevant where shared paths go underneath underpasses and the like, and they could strike the soffit of the beam that runs above them. If you aren't providing that clearance, particularly in low light conditions where those underpasses typically don't have great lighting, you can create a risk of obviously a cyclist striking their head. So not a great outcome. The other things that we have within this envelope are just these clearance from hazards. So we have a 0.2 minimum. That's also something that slightly differs from different papers, but that would only be considered appropriate where the hazard is something that's smooth, something that's not going to be like a fixed point hazard, and something that if the cyclist were to collide with it, it's not going to make them dismount or fall off their bike. So an example of that 200 mil minimum could be cycle-friendly fencing, which I do talk about later on in the slides. So if that isn't a term you've heard of before, I can run you through that. But that 0.5 meter desirable is much more standardized, and that's generally what's considered a hazard for cyclists. So if it's within half a metre of where the cyclist is riding, at the edge of their riding envelope, then that is where it's considered a hazard. So anything within that space is something that we should be trying to design either out, trying to remove that as a hazard, or trying to ensure that the cyclists are aware that that exists and making that as improving the conspicuity of it. So just improving the awareness that that hazard exists. Might just pause there and check in with Ken to see if we've had any questions.
One's just popped in. Does a trafficable vehicle lane require 0.2 metre or 0.5 minimum?
Trafficable vehicle lane require 0.2 metre or 0.5. So I read that as kind of your buffer between. Are we talking an on-road facility there? Sorry, Ken?
I think that's what Daniel is referring to. Maybe a little more detail there, exactly what you're trying to go to. We do have a hand raised. Nuno's raised his hand. Now, that is something that we have as an option. I'm going to check whether Nuno wants to actually ask a question.
Yeah, ask a question quickly if that's okay, Ken.
Yeah.
So you mentioned that there are different standards. The question I have is, which one should we use? Because it's easy for me to say, we will use this one because it's more advantageous for me as a council officer. You want to provide wider shed of parts, but then we go to the community, and some community members are informed, and they say, no, wait a minute, but you can actually use just 2 meters wide.
Yep, good question, Nuno. Thanks for asking. And you know what? I think that deserves a prize there, Ken. We'll make sure that Nuno gets a prize. And I think the most appropriate response there is just ensuring that you are achieving your particular jurisdictional guidelines. So if you're in New South Wales, referring to Transport for New South Wales guidance documents, ensuring that those specific measures are in place. Austroads have their own, envelopes and the like, and their own particular means of measuring these things, but ensuring that you're actually applying jurisdictional literature there, because for whatever reason, particular jurisdictions may have either supplements to the Austroads guides or have their own research that suggests one way is better than the other. So yes, certainly best to follow jurisdictional guidance.
So Nuno's Victorian, so that'll be the Vic Road supplement to the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A is your go-to, and then that defaults then from there to the Austroads Guide if it's not specified in that guide.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Awesome.
No problem.
Thanks, Nuno. And there you go, people. You have options to do that, but also to type it into the chat as well, as Daniel has done. Daniel's come back now with a little bit more info there.
Separated by spots. Okay, so for a shared path separated by spike down curbs, tight areas. So because if that spike down curbing, Daniel, is considered a mountable hazard, I would suggest the 200 mil clearance would be more appropriate. As I stated, the half a metre is generally taken where it's a fixed hazard, something like a signpost or a tree, the edge of a tree or a utility pole. That is when you would be more concerned of a cyclist actually potentially dismounting, falling off their bicycle. That's when the half a metre is applied. You can get a little bit closer to the things that are more cyclist friendly, like those mountable curbs that you've mentioned. Good question though, Daniel. Keep them coming, guys.
And Ash has got another one. In the cyclist envelope, are we taking into account cyclist lean around curves?
That's a really good question. Can we get Ash a prize there as well, Ken? I think that's something that I wanted to mention as well. Austroads currently recognise that this 1 metre envelope is taken as the operating width. However, it also acknowledges that it doesn't really cater for the curves that Ash has brought up, but also if a cyclist is pedaling uphill, you may have noticed they do this little side to side, little like left and right, and that pushes that envelope even further. So there's some talks to say that we need to increase this envelope to 1.5 metre, which you may see in future editions of these guidance papers. But yes, at the moment, it's certainly taken as an average kind of cyclist posture, and it's not quite as rigorous as looking at how cyclists would behave on curves or how they would behave uphill. But during detailed design, if you can start to think about how cyclists may actually use that facility within those instances, and particularly at curves, if you could look at widening curves, just like you'd widen roads, I think that's a really good suggestion. So well done, Ash.
And Jenny's also popped in there about standing up as well. So it's
Exactly
a
right.
cyclist in there, and yeah, there's a bit of extra height there.
That's right. And if you're looking at a penning farthing as well, that head clearance is probably not too relevant because they would be well and above that particular height. So it certainly does not take into account all cyclists, recumbent bicycles and the like. So yeah, it's meant to be a fairly average envelope that you're looking at there.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point you bring up there about the variety of cyclists and the like, which we're not going to delve into in detail. But one that you mentioned earlier, Max, and then Catherine also popped a comment in there. This mammal. What is this for those who don't know of this mammal?
So a mammal, apologies for those that aren't familiar, MAMIL, middle-aged man in lycra. So the people that get very excited on the weekend and get suited up in their lycra and then just they go for it on the arterial roads and usually in groups with all their friends. And yeah, that's what a mammal is. Something that I believe Ken doesn't mind enjoying on the weekends.
Yes, I'll put my hand up as a mammal. That's okay. Thank you.
That's all good. I'll hop back into it and I'll pause later on for some extra questions. But thanks everyone for everything that's come through so far. Chat more into detail about some common hazards that we do see on our shared paths. This one is an unfortunate design detail where they've put the bin and the bin post within the shared path facility rather than just flip that around and maybe create a refuse area that's outside the shared path would be a better design solution. We've got this, this is the edge of the shared path here. It's a little bit difficult to see in that photo, but there is a drop there, and that's the thickness of the concrete slab, so about 125 mil. And you may think that that is negligible or that's, perhaps not a significant risk, but this is actually on a bend. If a cyclist was to come off, particularly a road bike, which is shown in this photo here, the ability to actually get back onto the path it's not going to happen. In other words, if you came off at that location, you've got to stay off. You'll fall off your bike, or you'll be heading off down into this area here, which is more of a swampy area, which is not too good. So what we could look at within this particular example is we could just look at battering up to the edge of the concrete pavement there and just ensuring that there's no gap. So if a cyclist were to come off at that location, they've got a better chance of hopping back onto the path there. The last photo I've got here, it's a little bit difficult to see. There's a utility pole that's beautifully concealed by the vegetation that's growing there. Our edge of the path is just about here. So you can see it doesn't meet that 500 mil or half a metre requirement that I was discussing before. So we could look at ways to try and improve. I mean, ideally, perfect world would remove the hazard altogether and perhaps underground that asset or shift it further away from the edge of the shared path. However, you could also look at just improving the awareness that there is this hazard here and to perhaps narrow the path at this location. I do have an example on the next slide here of how this could actually look, narrowing the path. You can see you've got these flexible kind of, flexible signs there that show that the path is kind of, something's changing. You can see this gantry here. This is a gantry, and it's got a sign on it like this that goes across the road. So that's just an example of one way you can look to improve the conspicuity of the hazard, or just making sure that users within that area are aware that something's changing. There's a hazard within their space. Once again, in an ideal world, this is a fairly recent constructed road project, and this gantry was installed maybe a year ago or so. Amazing that we didn't just consider popping it back here within the verge and maintaining our 3-meter width shared path the whole way through here. It just seemed to be a little bit of an oversight from the project team, and I'm sure that these flexible bollards were not installed as the first primary treatment throughout the design process. It was more likely picked up as an audit finding from a road safety audit that occurred post-construction, and that's kind of what's been put in place. But certainly not saying that the flexible bollards are the best practice. It's just something that can be done to achieve, to improve the delineation in that space. And for those who may have noticed in the bottom of the slides, I tend to include a source, which will just point you to either the Google Maps reference, so you can click on it yourself and have a look and have a play around to see how that looks, or it does mention which particular guidance document that comes out of. Sometimes the same figure is used in many different guidance documents, so it might meet many different parts. Okay, let's talk about sightlines. I like to include this slide because for those that are designers or really into doing calculations, it's good to see that there's actually a sightline calculation for cyclists. So we always focus on what's the standard sight distance for vehicles, general traffic, and how far they can see to the intersection, if they've got appropriate sight lines to see oncoming traffic and the like. But there's also one for cyclists to be able to spot hazards on their shared path, which I think is pretty cool. So there is this particular formula, if it does apply to you. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because I appreciate not a lot of you would ever have the chance to use this, but just wanted to reiterate that it does actually exist. And there's also, I just wanted to mention this, a coefficient of friction, and you typically use the worst case scenario being wet conditions. So you're basically saying the grip on tires as well as the ability to brake in time is going to be the worst possible scenario, and that's how you would calculate your sightline requirements. The second calculation that's provided there is all about the vertical curve of a shared path. So in other words, if your shared path kind of looks like this, I can't remember what view that is, in the, not the long view, and you got your cyclist riding along here, beautiful cyclist, not terrific, but anyway, if they're able to see a hazard that is kind of around that curve there, so something that could be on that shared path that presents a hazard, it could be a pothole, it could be perhaps someone has laid tacks on the ground or something like that. This is an actual a calculation that can ensure that you're meeting those requirements. So once again, probably not relevant to everyone here, but just wanted to satisfy those that do like to get into these calculations. So here is just an example of if you did want to apply those calculations. This one is in the horizontal clearance, and I might just hop into an actual example of why this could be important. Believe it or not, this is a shared path. It doesn't look like it, but that is a sealed shared path. That's a bitumen product. And you can see this kind of vegetation here does a really good job of blocking what could potentially be around that bend. So this is an example where if you were doing a shared path design, you would try and make sure that cyclist sight lines can see an adequate distance to spot any hazards that may exist around that bend. And what that would actually mean in practice, it would mean that you wouldn't have landscaping here that would grow so big, or something that kind of grows like this instead, or not having landscaping so close to the edge of the radius of the path. Things like that you could consider. So that's just an example of how that sightline calculation could actually be used in practice in the real world. Okay, what have we got next? we'll talk fencing. So fencing for cyclists in itself can be a hazard. It's just bewildering how often we see fences that are adjacent a shared path that are not cycle-friendly fences. I'll show you what that means in a couple slides if you haven't heard that. But there are actual criteria to meet where you would put in a fence for a cyclist. And there's two types of fences that are generally considered. One of them is called a partial barrier fence. The other is a full barrier fence. Consider it like partial is, you know, there's a risk there for, there's a hazard behind here that we need to protect errant cyclists. However, it's a medium risk. A full barrier fence is, there's a significant risk behind here. We need to fully contain errant cyclists. So it's kind of a tiered approach. Partial being medium risk, full barrier, very high risk. How this is actually calculated, it's all dependent on how far away the hazard is from the edge of the path. And also, in this instance, it's stating what's that drop off that you're considering there. So that Y value is how far could the cyclist potentially fall. So you can see for a full barrier fence requirement, if the X, which is how far away it is from the edge of the shared path, if it's less than 5 meters and the drop off is greater than 2 meters, so basically you've got a cliff there, that's when you need a full barrier fence. I'll show you some slides of what that actually means in a second, but just wanted to show that there are calculations to actually verify these particular design details. Similarly, this equation over here, or this table here, is all about the gradient and how steep that particular slope is adjacent to the edge of the path. For some that work within batters, I'm sure this all looks fairly familiar to you, when to provide it and not, using the 1 to Z or the 1 to 5, 1 to 10 batter slope requirements. But for those that haven't seen that, it's basically, all it's saying is, depending on how flat the adjacent area is to the shared path, that determines whether or not you need a fence there. So if it's a gradient kind of like that, you're riding against something that's very, very steep, that's when you need to put a fence in. If it's flats, then you can just leave it as is. So let's have a look at what these fences actually look like. So this is our partial barrier fence, and you can see that there's no vertical members in place. So theoretically, you could get perhaps young children or, you know, anything could potentially fall through those gaps there. Whereas the full barrier fence, as you can see, nothing's getting through there. There's still a risk of potentially falling over that facility, but generally the heights of these things, you know, 1.2 meters, that's generally considered quite a low risk of falling over those facilities. The thing that I wanted to really emphasize, what makes these things cyclist friendly, are these shared path fences. Is if we look at traditional fencing, just traditional fences which just have posts and then beams that run across it, like take a chain mesh fence, there's a significant risk of handlebars snagging against the posts or within the chain mesh fence, and then that would result in a cyclist coming off their bike and not creating a good outcome. The smooth rails are deliberately installed at a particular height to capture a cyclist's wrist to shoulder. In other words, when you're riding on your bike, this is what will hit that smooth rail, and you'll slide against the fence rather than come to an abrupt stop, hitting a post and having to, you know, jerk and fall off your bike. So those smooth rails are critical, and that's not always provided in these cyclists or against cycling facilities, which is very interesting. The other thing I wanted to note just on this particular slide, which I think is interesting and something to not do in practice, but this signpost is installed in front of the fence. defeats the purpose of our beautiful deflection rail that I was just talking about. You've got this nice smooth rail, so if a cyclist is coming off, they can slide against the rail and not come off their bike, but you've just put this fixed hazard right in the middle of their path. So it's be much better practice if you could shift this just on the outside of that fence. Yes, just another little thing that bothers me.
So Max,
Here's just another graphic. This was from Transport for New South Wales. And I just wanted to mention also that low fences can be a risk or a hazard for cyclists as well, as they can actually strike at the pedal level and also create a destabilizing effect. Ken, how are we going?
yeah, good. The questions come in. So if X is greater than 5, does it mean no barrier required for any value for Y, any drop-off value?
Sorry, I've just lost my audio.
Oh, okay, we can still hear you. Not sure you've lost us. Can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. So the question was around the lateral offset. X is greater than 5. Does that mean no barrier required for any Y value, any drop value?
So for X is, I've got less than 5 here, sorry. So if X is greater than 5, then that is what it's suggesting. And once again, take that with a pinch of salt, because even if a cyclist may not run out further than 5 meters, you could have pedestrians that just use that area as a picnic. And if you've got a 2 meter drop, you would think you'd want to be fencing that off. So take those figures with a grain of salt.
Yeah, but that's what those figures are theoretically saying. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, that was it? Okay, no worries. I've actually got a little activity here. So Ken, before you head off, see back. Hey, would you like to launch our first poll of the day? Let's get everyone engaged. Let's get everyone excited.
Okay, so poll has been launched. It should pop up on people's screen. And you're not marked on this. This is not your official quizzes and the like. But we've got there, should fencing be installed along the shared path? This shared path, I believe you're talking about.
That's correct. Yeah, so I just moved that little banner out of the way so you can see it a bit clearer, but I'll do a little drawing what I'm talking about. Should we have a fence kind of like this along here? Obviously with a smooth rail to make sure that it's cycle friendly. Same on the other side. What does everyone think? Should fencing be installed along the shared path and all the way down to the end?
So while people are having a think about that, Jason's blocked in a question there. Do you have any advice on where a W-beam guardrail separates a shared path from a travel lane, constrained space? A fence would be needed, but may introduce a spearing hazard for cars. And I think that's a really excellent bit of thinking there. Did you want to comment on that first, Max?
I do. And my first comment is I think we can give Jason a prize because that's a really pertinent question. A few factors that I'd consider. So for those that are just trying to picture how that would look, if you've got a shared path with a guardrail system that separates the shared path to the road activity adjacent, the posts in particular, I'd be very concerned about for cyclists, as they would most likely be very close to the edge of the shared path, if not actually on the shared path. And if a cyclist were to collide with them, they'd come off the bicycle for sure. And if they were to actually hit that blunt, steel object, that's trauma associated with that would be fairly severe or relatively severe compared to, just kind of running off onto this vegetation that I've shown over here. So that would certainly be an issue. Although the question is asking if we installed cycle-friendly fencing close to the edge of the traffic lane, have we then created a hazard for general traffic? Because they may collide with the cycle-friendly fencing. That could create a spearing hazard to general traffic. And I think it's a valid point. That certainly would be something that you'd need to consider. One of the ways that you could look at this particular example is doing a risk assessment as to the level of risk associated with a cyclist colliding with the W-beam posts. What kind of severity would that entail? And also doing a risk assessment of what's the likelihood of a vehicle actually running off road at that location and striking the cycle fence. What's the severity associated with that? So trying to, I suppose, look at the two options that you've got ahead of you and trying to work out, well, what would actually be the safest outcome for both road users, because it's certainly not a blanket approach that I could give you advice on there.
I'm really going to steal the screen from you for a second, Max, because I was just the other day taking some photos of backing facilities for W-beams and share path facilities. I'm not sure if you can see that, Max.
Yeah, that's up. Yep.
Yeah, but it's a really valid point, because the back of the W-beam is quite a hazard, and so you do want to create that rail. This would not, though, the ability for a cyclist to go over this is absolutely there, but it's better than the idea of putting a potential spearing hazard very close to the road in the deflection zone of the barrier. So yeah, it's all a bit of case by case and thinking, but I just thought, I happened to have that photo just there. I thought I'd share it.
Perfect example. Thank you, Ken. So back to back there.
Well, that one was actually a plastic backing board on a W-beam, but you can do a back-to-back W-beam system as well. Now let's end the poll and share the results there. Most people are going with no.
Yes, okay, that's good to see. And I would tend to agree that no is probably the correct, well, probably the answer I would side with as well. For those that did say yes, I think that you sorry about that. It is reasonable to say that, just perhaps looking at the signposts and how close are these actually offset from the edge of the traffic, from the edge of the shared path. Looks like it comes in fairly close to that location as well. A few things that you need to consider with providing the fencing as well, just amenity, the attractiveness of the facility. If you're then blocking off all the vegetation and, blocking off that green corridor, that's also just going to affect on, the attractiveness of riding through there. So generally, I agree that we probably wouldn't require cycle-friendly fencing there. Also, just as an aside, if the cyclists were to come off, they're riding into, grass, vegetation. If they fall into that, probably not such a severe outcome. So something else to consider as to what that crash outcome would be. Thanks for everyone for joining in though. I'll continue on the presentation. And we're moving into shared paths now, crossing roads. So this one is an example where cyclists are actually given the priority crossing the road. So I've got this example over here, which is in Melbourne. Oh, my mouse is, there we go. This guy here, and a few features to note. It's raised. There's a different contrasting pavement color. So you can see general pavement is, for the general traffic, is just typical asphalt. And for the cyclists and pedestrians crossing, it's a bright yellow or orangey yellow color. Also see there's a give way to pedestrians and cyclist symbolic, which is used on the shared paths as well. Fantastic for continuity for cyclists. Rather than having cyclists to stop and pause at every single intersection that they come up to, you give cyclists the priority. And if you're dealing with strategic cycling corridors, or those cycling networks that you consider as at a network level to be your most important, I really believe you should be prioritizing cyclist movements across all your local streets. Even if you can do it across arterial roads, that's another big bonus, but certainly your local streets, because you want to make your cycling community provide that facility that is continuous as possible, and just makes such a more comfortable ride, not having to continually stop and start at all your minor legs. This other example I've got here is the Brisbane Bicentennial, another fantastic path. However, it's this particular example, not one that I consider best practice, and I'm happy for anyone in the chat to mention why I wouldn't consider this second photo quite as good practice as the first. It's also raised. There's also the give way sign. So it's certainly got similar features, but what do you think I'm not quite as impressed about the second example?
All right, Max, I'll give it a second. We've already got a quick answer in there from Duncan, which is good. Let's give it a little second here. Just say, oh, good stuff coming in. So we've got, straight off the bat, Duncan's not happy with the angle and the ability to have vision at that angle. We've got some issues with signage and clarity, color confusion, a little confusing at first glance. Who has priority is a question there. Give way sign is ambiguous. It's hard for the cyclist to look behind. Conflict with PEDs, the angle, and around a corner. Bollards are a hazard. Wow.
Jeez.
Who does the speed limit apply to? There's an interesting extra comment. Okay, what did you think there, Max?
I certainly agree with all of them, and that bollards pickup was spot on. To be honest, I didn't even notice them there. So I think a prize out to the bollards comment there, Ken. But the comments in particular that I had in my mind probably goes to Duncan, and he was straight off the bat. Just this angle of approach. You could imagine if you're cycling kind of at speed and you want to cross over at this location, your ability to turn right round and sight oncoming traffic at this service road, pretty limited, particularly as a cyclist. You want to maintain your speed. You don't particularly want to be slowing down, particularly at locations where you have the priority. So you'd almost, with a false sense of confidence, head through there and hope that you'd be okay. And that is obviously not such a good approach, within our cycling network. We want to make sure that we have adequate sight lines, and it's easy to be able to actually spot oncoming traffic there. So while I love this bike path facility, and I've got nothing but praise, I do think that this particular arrangement does make it a little bit challenging for cyclists to be able to sight oncoming traffic there.
Thank you. And prize in there for Penny, first in with the bollards comment. It'd be interesting to have a closer look at those bollards, see if they're flexible or not.
They look metal to me, but yes, I'll dig up the original photo and we'll have a deep look at that one. Speaking of bollards, that was a beautiful segue. So thank you, Penny. Certainly a significant hazard to cyclists, and I fully appreciate those that perhaps don't cycle and just walk past these on a daily basis and don't see the issue with them, or don't see how that could be a hazard for cyclists. And I'll get to that in a few slides, but just wanted to really highlight that there is such an array of different treatments for bollards. These are just a little bit of tape that you get from the local hardware store, just slapped onto some white timber bollards. These metallic bollards that just blend in perfectly with the surrounding bluestone pavement. So it's just impossible to see those in low light conditions, or if it's really, really heavy rain and it's very dark, incredibly difficult to see those. This one, for some reason, has been treated with some type of tape, but not the other bollards, which is interesting. I've got a few more examples. Sorry, I get pretty passionate about my bollards. Got another timber example here with vegetation growing up, nearly covering it. These chicane treatments are also used as a means to kind of slow down cyclists on approach to roads as well, which I've got nothing against. That can certainly work, but just making sure that it's as obvious as possible so cyclists can see it. And this guy here, that one's in Hobart, as you're riding into Hobart. Once again, it's in the middle of the actual cycle path, so certainly presents a hazard. My main principles for bollards, and this may seem a little bit silly, but is it actually required? Because the number of bollards that you see, particularly in metropolitan areas where there's no possible way a vehicle could actually enter this, like general traffic I'm talking about. So the way that, or the reason that that bollard actually exists on the shared path is to prevent maintenance vehicles or rubbish vehicles or anything like that. When they go to pick up or do any work within that area, there's a bollard there for them that they can't go any further. I would question if it's not more advantageous for cyclist safety to have a conversation with the groups that do those services to not enter the shared path, or to provide other means to restrict their access rather than putting these actual bollards. So that's my first principle. Is it actually required? The second principle is, as I said before, making it as obvious as possible. It can't be blending in with the background. It needs to be retroreflective. And for those that aren't familiar with that term, it means if you were to shoot light at it, the light comes straight back at you. So if you've got like a headlamp on your bicycle, it will be sending it straight back to you. It just really, really makes it as vibrant as possible and makes it much, much clearer. And yeah, so that's the two key takeaways for bollards there. Ken.
Yeah, really good questions come in from Luke around, and we can probably use one of these pictures, maybe the one on the right-hand side there as an example. So if there was a road crossing there where the shared path had priority over the road, going on a downhill, what would be the appropriate or best way, do you think, to slow the cyclist down if there was some sight distance constraints and things like that? So we see the cyclist shooting along there, and you don't want them crossing that, even though they've got priority, crossing that, I suppose, too fast potentially. Any thoughts around that?
So it's probably similar thinking to what we would do if we were to slow down general traffic. We could look at horizontal deflections. That would then get cyclists, having to slow down because there's that actual deflection in their path. And that's not through putting a fixed hazard there. That's just through the path alignment. You could also look at more, visual cues, pavement markers that kind of lie across the path itself. They can also be slightly raised, and they can provide a little bit of a haptic warning. So in other words, you'll feel it in your handlebars that, oh, something's changing. There's a hazard ahead of me. There's something I need to be alert of, to once again alert cyclists that they're approaching a road. Just a few considerations in that space. Did you have any thoughts, Ken?
Yeah, I think the sort of rumble strip style approach is a good one. You've got to be obviously careful with it. You don't want to make it too harsh. There have been a few examples around especially New Zealand actually, of actually raising the path. So having a raised part of the path as essentially a platform, slowing vehicles down on the approach to specific hazard areas or the like. But I think agree with what you've got there.
I'll share this next slide, and this is just another example. I swear I'll move on from bollards soon, but this one, as you can see, not in the best condition here. It's blending in quite well with the white continuous stripe behind it. And this fellow here was unfortunate enough to actually strike it. The reason I included in this slide is because just wanted to mention what happened to this fellow. He suffered 3 broken bones in his wrist and facial injuries when he collided with this bollard. This is a very, very popular commuter cyclist route here in Melbourne. And incredibly, while waiting for the ambulance to arrive, 2 other cyclists hit the same bollard, and they just had minor injuries. But in such a short period of time, and we do know that not all cyclist crashes are recorded, particularly if they're not on the road network. So in just that short period of time, you had 3 cyclists hit the same bollard, and that's what it looked like. Council then went out after this news story kind of broke. They went out there, they sprayed the bollard, put some new tape on it, and thought that's the answer to it there. But yes, just wanted to highlight that it's not just an annoyance or a grievance of cyclists, it is a genuine hazard. And if you've got a cyclist that's in front of you, if you're on a commuter path, they might block the sight line. So you may not actually see the bollard. You then go to overtake them, and then that's you've hit the bollard. So yes, it's certainly to be used with a little bit more, or a little bit of skill, I would suggest. Here's an example of what I would consider best practice within the bollard space, acknowledging that we do need to ensure that general traffic can't access shared paths. So this is what we've got within the Austroads guide, and it's not actually applied all that often because the bollards are just a lot easier. But we have this almost kind of splitter island setup where you separate both the opposing traffic streams for the cyclists and peds movements, and you create this central median area which you can use for landscaping. You can put in like a little luminaire. You could put in a bollard there because it's off the shared path. It's not right in the middle of the shared path as well. And I've got an example of how this could potentially look in practice. So this is just an example here of the grassed kind of median being used. These are bollards. However, as you can see, they're not in the shared path, and they also double as lights. So they've got little luminaires on them. So they light up at night, which means you can see them in all conditions. And I think that's a much better approach to go for rather than just smacking a bollard right in the middle there and making sure no vehicle enters that bridge. So just another little best practice tip there for you guys. When we are looking at shared paths crossing roads as well, we do need to consider our DDA requirements. So that's the Disability Discrimination Act, and it's not always applied. So it's something that is probably considered a lot more frequently with curb ramps and where there are zebra crossing, wombat crossings and the like, where we are raising the crossing point, as we can see in this particular example here. So we're raising the shared path to be the priority across the minor leg. Then we do need to actually provide tactile ground surface indicators. And for those that are not familiar with that term, so those little blocks, those little pavers that sit just on approach to the road, so people with vision impairments can feel that there's a hazard coming up, the hazard being the road, and they can, yes, they can safely cross over when they can. Some argue that the TGSI pavements markers create a bit of an issue for cyclists. However, I consider that fairly negligible, and the risk to vision impaired people crossing the road is generally a higher risk than cyclists perhaps getting a little bit of a rumble in their handlebars as they cross over those TGSIs. So something else to consider if you are doing any of those raised treatments across minor legs. Got another little exercise for everyone here, and it's my favorite time of day where I ask, well, what's wrong with this photo? There we go. I've been meaning to get like a little backing tune to do there, just like a little keyboard hit or something, but you can see I've got a confused cyclist there, and she's trying to work out, well, what's going on here? So I've just asked everyone in the chat to, I'll just get rid of that cyclist, to tell me, well, what's wrong with this photo?
Well, they're coming in quick here, Max. Nuno, hot off the blocks there. No priority signs. Naomi asking who goes first, who gives way, no arrows, line marking is inadequate, ambiguous priority, no clarity priority, who's priority, wayfinding direction, confusing priority, who goes where, who gives way. Lots of great answers there. And Asha said there's no bollards, just to keep you on your toes there, man.
Thanks, Ash.
Lots of others there. Any you want to give a prize to there for?
Yeah, certainly the ambiguous priority, whoever was the first to say that, but it sounded like everyone had the same idea there, so that's good to see. And just for those that may not be familiar with what we're talking about there, it's just ensuring that one of those, so that's the main routes, and then the other leg is to be treated as a minor leg. So that could look like something like providing a give way line marking approach on this leg with a little give way sign to cyclists approaching from that direction. And that means everyone traveling this way and this way, they get a free run of it, rather than what you've got here, which is basically whoever gets there first or whoever is the most confident the wayfinding signage. This is one that really frustrated me. I was actually cycling this route, which is when I took this photo, and I didn't know where to go. And I wasn't sure if I forked to the left or forked to the right to continue my journey. And it's something that's not really generally covered too well within Australia. Something that we could do with some improvements. So something that I will talk about over the next couple of slides.
And Max, one that came in there from Tim, and hello Tim from Elfs Harbour there. Lighting, no lighting there. Have you ridden it at night, and how'd you go?
I did ride this at night because we did an order for this one, Ken, and there's no lighting along the entire alignment, which is not uncommon for cycling facilities. The kind of guidance within that space is all dependent on the number of cycling traffic volumes you're expecting. There's no metrics to say that if you've got this many, that's when you put lightings in. It's kind of a subjective criteria in that sense. However, yes, in an ideal world, everything would be beautifully lit and you would see from start to finish at all conditions. However, acknowledge that if it's the difference between getting a project delivered and not getting anything done, then these kind of treatments are, I suppose that's just the norm.
Well, I'm just about to embark on a independent evaluation of some photoluminescent line marking of a shared path. I don't know what to expect out of that, but I'll let people know what we think of that. And that's the idea being that, yeah, some of those shared path facilities don't quite have the lighting. Now, have we just lost Max there, have we? Looks like we've lost Max. I assume everybody's still with me. Or have we lost me? Yes, hi, good. Okay, you're with me. Well, we've got rid of Max, so straight over to me, and I'm just going to pick up where Max left off. Yep, he's gone. Okay, so here we go. Actually, what I might do is, while Max gets himself back, I might show you. Oh, have we got you back, Max?
Yes, sorry about that. I don't know what happens. I will let you run through Moodle now if you want, though. Actually, I've got a few more slides, and then I'll jump over to you.
Yeah, keep going. I was just going to fill that time with the Moodle thing from the end, but you keep going.
So I was just going to discuss wayfinding signage, and it's good to see that Austroads actually has an entire report on this particular topic. So if you haven't come across it, it's a page turner. It's a good one to flick through, and if you are working within the space of doing any of the shared paths, awesome resource, because it can really just stipulate exactly how your fingerboard signs should look, best way to communicate information, short and brief, making sure that cyclists know exactly where they're going, picking out the major destinations and the like. So lots of great information there. Here's just an example of a fairly well-signed route here. We've got clearly different destinations for cyclists, the distances that they have to ride. Another kind of means that you can do it, particularly for shared paths, you can do how long it actually takes to ride that. So it might take 5 minutes to ride to Balmain there, if you are a very fast cyclist. But yeah, just another kind of thing to think about on the shared paths. And I'll just show you how things look internationally, which is perhaps a little bit more advanced than what we have within the Australian network. And they actually tend to number all of their routes. So in other words, you may know that route number 2 goes from the train station all the way into the city centre, and you just follow number 2 and you know that you're on the right path, basically. This one's in Denmark, in Copenhagen. They use the blue for their bicycle lanes. So that's a really good way of doing it, these numbered systems. And you can also see this one here is in Amsterdam. The Dutch, obviously very famous for their cycling infrastructure. Another example where they use numbers to clearly articulate all the different routes. And so if you were a cyclist, you wouldn't need to worry about coming up to that fork, not knowing where to go. Everything will be spelled out for you, and you know exactly which fork to take to continue your journey. So room for improvement there for Australia and probably for New Zealand as well, but I may be speaking out of turn there.
Now, a couple of things there, Max.
Yeah.
So Nuno has kindly shared the Wayfinding Victoria document, which is a really great resource. Thank you for popping that into the chat there. John's asking, just where's that measured from, those distances? Is it, he's saying the vehicles, it's between focal points or the local post office. Any comment on that?
Oh, where it's actually measured from? I would, yeah, that's a good question. I would assume that would be where you would consider the hub of the activity, like the major activity centre. So for Melbourne, I would assume that's Fed Square, as in like that's the centre of the city. But I would, yeah, that would probably need to be discovered on a case-by-case basis. For some things, it'd be easy. The bus stop, the train station, you know, those are very clear indicators. But for other things like the town centre, there's a little bit of wiggle room as to what is actually considered the town centre. So it's a good question.
And then some just questions about with the prevalence of smartphones and maps and the like, if there's any point numbering. All of this, it's a sort of bigger question, isn't it?
Yeah, I certainly still think that there is. As I said, I got stuck at that fork, and that's why I took a photo of it. But I did have my phone on me, but my maps wasn't working because I used too much data, so I couldn't work out exactly where I was. So I just had to take a guess. So just one example of why you need signs. But no, it's a little bit in jest, but also just I do think that they provide it's such a simple solution. Why would you not just make it as easy as possible for everyone within that area?
Yeah, no, I think it's still certainly helping out there. I think it also does a little bit for promoting the idea of cycling. I think people walking or doing a short trip can say, oh, I can take this all the way to wherever, or the like, oh yeah, go to the shops there. So I think there's wider benefits as well from that perspective.
Definitely. Any other questions there, Ken?
No, some different comments, which is great, and everybody's sharing it with everyone. And Naomi's put some other awesome links in there. So this is good stuff.
Fantastic. Okay, so the last kind of part that I want to discuss today is just when we've got shared paths, crossing shared paths, or crossing really, really busy pedestrianised areas. So this example is actually in Perth. It's in a City West station, for those that are familiar. And this is where pedestrians exit the train and cross over the rail line here. And you can imagine during peak periods, there's just a whole crowd of pedestrians that cross straight over the shared path. And so what they've actually done in Western Australia there, they've created these little splitter islands. They've done give way signage, pavement markings as well, which I suppose is another way of just trying to create this kind of intersection, basically, where there's vulnerable road users within this space and you need to slow down. It's quite an interesting approach. And another means that you could, actually, I might just open that up to the group. Could anyone think of anything else that you could potentially do in this space where you are getting high volumes of pedestrians crossing straight over a shared path like this? So you've got cyclists going in one direction, pedestrians in the other, and you want to make it as obvious as possible that there is this conflict, and it does exist. Nothing against this particular design, but just want to explore some other ideas people may have.
Well, we've got ideas there to change the colour of the crossing, raise the crossing point. Lots of people wanting to raise that, and lots of support on the colour. Maybe make it a zebra crossing, so mark it as an actual pedestrian crossing point, and the vehicles, in being the cyclists, would give way. There's a few ideas.
I love the raised crossing point. I think that's a really good one. You can see, and as before, as I illustrated, one means of slowing down cycling traffic is to use horizontal deflection, which is what you've got on both of these approaches. So that's obviously the approach that they've used here. However, you can get the same kind of slowing down cycling operating speeds as well through a raised platform. Something not quite as severe as that, but you know, just creating a raised table. And if you get your pedestrians up on the this section, on the actual flat part of the hump. That increases their awareness, like that's where they are. If they're raised, they're easier to spot. And also it means cyclists traveling within that area, well, they're forced to slow down because they've got a hump. So they're going to slow down regardless. So it's just a really good idea. Same kind of thinking that you would do within the road space as well. If you were looking at pedestrians crossing over a road, what do we do with our zebra crossings? We raise them up as well, like a wombat crossing. So it's that same kind of thinking that you could apply within the cycling infrastructure space. And yeah, I think it's just another way to do it. But certainly don't discount what's been done here. And I'll show you a photo in the next module as to what this actually looks like in busy conditions, because you can see it just changes drastically. Another kind of supporting or supplementary treatments. This is not the be all and end all, but just kind of providing these visual cues to cyclists that pedestrians are going to be crossing in the area, and just ensuring that cyclists are slowing down. So that is just another means of doing it. That is the end of today's session, but we do have just some things to run through on Moodle. I just wanted to show, yes, this is the end of the shared path and also the end of our module, but this is an interesting way to do it, just to basically say that's the end of the extent of the project and I'm not doing anything more, and I'm going to close it off here. So that's a real example. That's if you click on that link, you can have a look there. And I can see why this particular project has entered the shared path here. You've got a really, really busy arterial here and a big roundabout.
All right, I think we might be losing Max again. So Max has fallen off the end of the shared path, I think. And I'll just wait to get Max's screen. I'm going to steal his screen from him. That's the end of the NBN right there, says Duncan. I love it. Okay.
I can still hear you. Can you hear me?
Oh, got you back now, Max. Hello. Yes.
That's the end of that conversation anyway. So don't know what's happening with my internet today, but I'll hand it over to you, Ken, to run through Moodle.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, we lost you for a second there. I'm just going to go onto my second screen and just get up Moodle up and running. So yes, some of you will have got in and explored, and thank you to those who have popped in the introductions. I've got to read through a few more of them, but it's a nice way to see who else is on the course and meet some new people, and you'll be able to have an idea of who's doing it. There's a bit of a video for Tasmanians, the Tasmanian Bicycle Network Tasmania. I wanted to show their support to the Tasmanians who are jumping on this course. And here you'll see reference documents and resources. There's a folder there with lots of good information, and then some of those bits of course information. We do have an option if anybody's got things that they would like to share, to dump them into this folder. That's a great way to do that. Or, as many of you have done, a link to download it during the chat and those sort of things. So then you'll see here we've got module 1, 2, 3, 4, and down the bottom some other the feedback and the certificate and the like. We can see here, I'll start with the quiz, and we've got a quiz that you'll need to do. So you click on that and you will attempt quiz now. So you'll have to get 80%. You have 3 cracks at that if you want, or if you need, but once you've got to submit it, and then you can have another crack at it. If you get one wrong, you've got to finish off that quiz and then go back. So that's that. The other thing we're going to get you to do, though, is utilize, hopefully you've got your 360-degree goggles, your VR goggles in your pack. Now, don't worry if you haven't got them yet, but they're the cardboard ones that you put together, and you put your phone into it. And this is the first of our 360-degree videos. And so you'll click on that and it'll open up in YouTube. Now, Max, I think are you seeing the YouTube there on the screen?
Yes, that's come through.
Beautiful. So if you've got your 360-degree goggles on, you will then be able to just look around, and it'll move around like this as you move your head. You can look up, down, and the like, and you can play that. If you haven't got that working, or it doesn't, it gives you a headache, or it doesn't quite work for you, you can just open it up in the desktop version, just the way I have, and then you can play it and look around. Oh, there's me over there, and you can see yourself crossing a shared path there. You can look back on it. And you can get to, there's Max and I having a bit of a chat to you about a few things. Now, one little tip here is down here in the settings, is if you hit quality there and bump it up to the highest quality. If you leave it on auto, it'll really just depend on what your internet is doing, and it sometimes makes it a bit blurry. But at the highest quality, you get some nice images there. Now, what we want you to do is watch the video of the 2 share paths, or just listen. Max and I explain it there, but watch the 2 shared paths, and then we'll have a bit of a chat about those in the next session. So that's that one. I'll jump back out of that. And we do that sort of after each of the sessions with different 360-degree vision, walking you through, well, from the saddle, taking you riding through the infrastructure as best we can in this environment. Anything else? So we'll upload the recording to here as well, so you'll be able to watch that back if you want, or if you miss it, that's where you'll find it within that module. Anything else to add there, Max?
No, I was just going to suggest if everyone could have a look at that video before our next webinar on Thursday, because we will ask a question on that day to just to see how everyone found it, and also just regarding the video itself. So have a look through the video if you can before then. And same thing with the quiz as well. If you can give that a go before Thursday, that'd be fantastic. And just you can provide us any feedback that you may have had with the first quiz. But other than that, I think everything's all good. Apologies to everyone for my unstable internet connection.
So the Naomi's just asking there, are the slides downloadable? Yes, well, those were the PDF in there, in that module of the slides. And you also will have them on your memory stick if that pack's arrived. So you've got a couple of ways to get those. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody. Log in a little bit early for the next session if you want a chance to win a prize, a bit of trivia. I'll whip out some trivia questions. Could be pub trivia, could be random, could be bike trivia, could be anything. But chances to win prizes are a little incentive to get you in a little bit early. So we're going to leave you now, and we look forward to seeing you on Thursday.
Thanks
Thanks, everyone.
guys.
Bye.
Cheers.